where we are putting death out of business. And we've got Jason Mallory here. He's a... it's interesting because he was here for an algocracy debate. If you haven't seen that, you should have seen that. It was a fantastic debate. Algorithms ruling the universe, ruling the world. What do you reckon? But anyway, that was an interesting debate. And Jason Mallory is an interesting person because he's running for president. Well, is he running for president? He's running for Silicon Valley congressional campaign. That's what he's running for, not the president. We've got Ben Zion who's running for president. And Ben Zion can take a fashion tip or two off you. By the way, you're looking great, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a federal position, but it's not the president. So the United States has three different branches of government, one of which being a Congress and Senate, another of which being the executive presidency, and the other of which being the judiciary, considering if things are constitutional or not. Congress is where new ideas are to be brought to federal government to be turned into a bill to pass through the House and Senate and eventually be signed into new laws. It's a 2-year term. I will be up against an incumbent who's been there for over 25 years because there's no term limit. But I don't see anything new nor a real reply to what's become a national conversation on automation, which has a lot of people looking at Silicon Valley as where a lot of this technology is coming from. So I have a very good reply and plan to stabilize global economies in the future through a single policy. And that's what I'm putting forward, just to be able to solve that problem. Whether I win or lose, I'm not likely to win, to tell you the truth, but to be able to voice a solution, I feel it's kind of an obligation to do so.
And you're a techno-optimist, yeah?
Yeah, I think we're in an evolutionary stage where we're able to evolve society out of making tools of each other into making content people and friends of each other. Human resources as a department for a company where you're hiring people looks a lot different 100 years ago to 100 years in the future, with the amount of automation that can occur for things that people just don't want to do, regardless of pay. The ability to evolve society into not just chasing power or chasing money and these types of things, but to be able to make friends of each other rather than tools of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it all fails, if it all falls over, you're always welcome at the USTP. We're all techno-optimists here. It's a friendly, vibrant, friendly community. And and all the best with your campaign in the meantime. But yeah, if you're ever looking for a home, USTP might be the place to go. It's always good fun over here. We're always having fun. So always keep that in your back pocket. But Silicon Valley, absolutely, it's the heart of the it's the heart of US tech, and it's the heart of the USTP as well. In the fact that this is where all the ideas are being produced, and you're heading for it. So we're interested. Tell us more.
Well, I'm actually from here. I'm fourth-generation college graduate from Silicon Valley, although I live in Sacramento most of the time now, where I work as a teacher and have been able to teach 10,000 students there as a substitute and guest teacher. But as I've grown up here in the Valley, I've seen the entire skyline change. I've watched, across the street from our neighborhood, spring up eBay. They literally picked up a very, very old mansion and moved it a block or about a mile away, and this very reflective glass building of eBay popped up, and a lot of changes like that, going from everyone having a cherry tree and an avocado tree in their backyard, former farmland, to basically farming silicon and and the ability to process.
Mallory 2020 is a Silicon Valley congressional campaign for the best solution addressing technology in the workforce. Automation makes human lives better, but it takes human jobs. How we evolve our economy with technology is now at a pivotal point in history. We as a country need to continue technological progress, which means we cannot tax or regulate it to the point it cannot develop. But we might also want to determine what is street legal for a robot, and what people also need, and people also need income as technology makes many human jobs obsolete in the workforce, maybe 50% of the upcoming generation of workers. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. This is just an excerpt from Mallory 2020. I'm just reading an excerpt. So if you're interested in this, head over to Mallory 2020 to have a look at this. It continues. To balance this and deal with the growing pains of technology, we must address the changing economic landscape, the balancing of supply and demand, and how to stabilize these things long term. That's an interesting idea. You're a teacher. Teach me.
Yeah, so the solutions that are coming out currently are for universal basic income, which is a partway solution, but it's not an actual fix. So if you look at, if you 20, 30, 100 years from now, where if, let's say human labor and automation are about equal in what they're able to produce, well, in a certain number of years, automation is going to be able to do 10 times what all human labor around the world can do. So to prevent the potential monopolization of that, and to prevent for-profit motivation being what dictates the direction of the world and what actual goals are being worked on to be produced, we could have an equal vote for what our individual shares of the automated labor force do or don't do. And that way human beings can remain in control of our destiny and have an economic leverage. So that essentially enables, it prevents monopolization. It prevents going in a direction that the majority might not want to go in at all. And it's boiled down into a single policy, which is that every citizen can have the right to one equal share of the automated labor force, an equal vote for what it does or does not perform, and a fair share of what it produces as a whole. That fair share of what it produces is a UBI aspect, although it's not an amount that would be determined through politics. It would be a percentage of an hourly rate on automated labor. So here in the United States, we have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which approves drugs. So a doctor can legally prescribe an FDA-approved drug. So similarly, what I'd like to put into Congress is a Department of Automated Labor that would be able to approve automation systems. So we have like a national security standard. So all of these Nissan self-driving cars don't become self-driving missiles. We might want to have hardware processing keys, that type of stuff, to be able to prevent those types of issues, and have a list of approved automated labor. And each of those pieces of approved automated labor, each of those systems would have an hourly rate attached. And that hourly rate makes it much more accessible for small business to be able to use the same tools as big business and be competitive. And that gives us a middle class post-automation by having small business actually able to compete, not just have a UBI and a very unlikely future at competing with a global company. So if rather than having a large fixed cost of having to buy $1 million tool, instead if it's an hourly rate, that enables a lot more innovation, that enables a lot more upward momentum and ambition in society, in the middle class, really. So I think that's certainly a value addition to UBI, to be able to take the UBI as a percentage of an hourly rate for automated systems. And moreover, just like how we can adjust interest rates and how the Federal Reserve Bank here in the States sets an interest rate, 3 or 4% or whatever it might be, that's a knob that you can tune the economy with. So if we have another knob of not just setting supply side interest rates for money supply, but if we have a knob to adjust labor supply through adjusting hourly rates on all automated labor, as well as a percentage of that would be going to fund a UBI for the transition that we're making in society, that enables us to tune an economy into something that we haven't yet seen on this planet. Go ahead.
That's super interesting, and you know, I just had the head of World Transhuman. I know you're not officially a transhumanist or whatever, and this is a transhumanist show, but that's fine, and we endorse all of these Andrew Yang type. And I don't mean to I don't mean to say Andrew Yang like it's not your idea or whatever, but these are within the realm of the Andrew Yang sort of talking points, and. Yeah, if that's not offensive. So, you know, within this realm of ideas, I just had Provost James Hughes. He used to be the head of World Transhumanism, and Ben Zions brought this up as well a few times. But in Alaska, for example, you know, these Alaskans, they have a common oil product, basically, that they draw from, and they all can take like basically a UBI from it. It's like a common work project, right? So you're saying data is the new oil, and people are entitled to a chunk of it, yeah?
That's not exactly what I'm saying. Basically, I think that we should have a democracy 2.0, not just being paid a freedom dividend to no longer have a vote for what our labor is working to produce.
Sure.
I like Andrew Yang. I think he has a lot of great ideas. I think he's taken a mute subject of automation and turned it into a national conversation, which is making it timely for me to put forward what I believe to be a better solution, although it's not as marketable to put a bunch of heavy economics onto people instead of just saying, hey, do you want $1,000? That's marketable. Andrew Yang is the marketing plan of UBI. But as far as an end-all, be-all, economy balancing, human motivation preserving system, I don't see the freedom dividend providing a democracy 2.0 where, for example, human opinion sets labor rates, where if it's unpopular to, for example, to work for a tobacco company, but more popular to work for an environmental company, the environmental company doesn't have to pay as much, and the tobacco company has to pay more in order to get the employees. So that difference, that setting of labor rate, is public opinion. That's our vote that we would be losing by making ourselves obsolete through automation and just having a freedom dividend UBI without having a vote for what our share of the automated workforce is or is not doing. And when each person, if we all had an equal share of all automation, if that's, you know, a 1-to-1 ratio of how much work you could do with your hands right now, compared to how much the automation could do, in 20 years, it might be 10-fold, it might be 20-fold. So to prevent a much more effective workforce from being totally without a democratic control over it in any way, other than regulatory agencies that are always behind the times and reactionary as opposed to, you know, forward progressing. You know, I don't see that as a lot of the spirit of the United States in regards to having, you know, we the people running the show. So I think having a vote for what our share of the workforce is or is not doing is an important piece. And boiling it down into that one line kind of it enables people to pencil it in at the bottom of the Constitution until we can come up with a better system or just decide that we don't need to vote for what work is getting done anymore.
All right. Interesting. So existing solutions are for universal basic income, which is wealth distribution of free money given to the citizens, and which long-term threatens to form a UBI-dependent society. This free payment can help the demand side of the economy, but does nothing for the supply side, which inevitably means prices will rise to compensate UBI funding taxes, making the UBI not enough, and the economy would enter a downward economic inflationary spiral. The UBI alone cannot cure the problem unless there is something also growing the supply side, creating a new business, growing the middle class, enabling the economy and independence. With technology, the supply side of the economy has consolidated from many businesses into a few very large organizations. This shrinks the supply side and the total number of jobs available, and also looms as a threat of those new organizations, of those few organizations that can effectively own the automated workforce and take society in whatever direction they want. Unless planned for, the future of free market will likely need to go through a process similar to the development of the anti-monopoly laws, but regarding ownership of labor, of ownership of labor. So simple UBI is not simply a sufficient answer. A smart UBI maybe. That's kind of interesting. So supply side shrinking, UBI not making up.
Shrinking, but consolidating. It's actually growing, but it's consolidating at the same time. So the number of businesses is shrinking and the number of jobs is shrinking, but we're able to supply more than we ever have been. So it's going from this to this, as a graph might show.
And that's a problem. Why?
It reduces the number of jobs. It reduces the number of businesses that can be taking a different approach to a problem, or producing a different innovation. It reduces the number of directions that we can go.
Okay, yeah, So you know, this is an obvious idea. So that people are bringing up the UBI because they want to expand the demand side, and you're saying that's not going to work either.
It's a partial fix, but it's not a complete solution. I would like to have the ability to still control what labor would be done from my unit as a citizen. To be able to control that is, I feel, as important as the vote or a representative.
So you said here at the end, unless planned for, the future of free market would likely need to go through a process similar to the development of the anti-monopoly laws, but regarding the ownership of labor. I explain the anti-monopoly laws. Let's get that around our heads first. What were the anti-monopoly laws? And then how would you convert that to labor? Let's talk about labor, because it's very socialist talking about labor. It's all very, so let's talk about it.
Okay.
Anti-monopoly laws.
Beginning with the anti-monopoly laws, essentially here in the United States, we start forming factory lines. We bring cottage industry into industrialization, right? The steam engine occurs, and we're able to run a factory instead of having everybody make their own stuff at their own houses and sell what they have a surplus of. Instead, people go to work at a company and get paid. What happened in the early days of that is companies started paying with their own currencies, company script that was only good at the company general store, so people became not free to leave, even though they were getting paid from the job. And it was making it so the entire town was one business. And that was a monopoly. You could also see this without having competition in specific things, such as with the auto manufacturers more recently. There's a company called Tucker Automobiles that was destroyed by the big three auto manufacturers, even though it had an arguably better product. The fenders turned with the headlights when you steered, so you had better visuals. And you wouldn't, run into something as easily. Basic things like that, 3 headlight system that way. But the company went under because of a triad monopoly, essentially. So when we started looking at how do you break up a company that owns the entire town and is paying in its own currency so that we could have a free market, in those types of realms, we ended up with anti-monopoly laws, which can say, we need to be able to have competition in these aspects. So it was antitrust and anti-monopoly. And in the process of doing so, there were, labor unions were created. There were, physical violence. These types of things occurred in the process of doing that, in the process of people wanting to be more free. Not just with proposed rights, but the ability to work and move forward financially. So if we're looking at that with the current industrial revolution of automation, you've got the consumer base, all the people. We all need to eat, we all need shelter, basic stuff. So we are the consumer base. When we are also the workforce, there's a natural check and balance. So when we split those two things, and we have the consumer base and the workforce being two different things, we can write a law that would still have the consumer base owning the workforce by saying that every citizen has the right to one equal share of the automated labor force, an equal vote for what it does or does not perform, and a fair share of what it produces. And in doing so, we can prevent future labor revolutions and things like that. When people say in the world.
So this idea is your smart UBI?
Yeah. Well, that as well as taking the UBI as a percentage of an hourly rate from the making sure the consumer base still owns the workforce, even though automation separates the consumer base and the workforce into two different things. So that's part of the balance that UBI does. But if it's just here's some money, you have no control over the workforce, there's a big tangible piece that's missing there. So when we structure a UBI, we could do it in a lot of different ways. And if we do it where people have an equal share of that workforce and they're getting a percentage of all automated labor, we could actually incentivize the use of automation, because the more and more automation there is, the bigger that UBI gets. If it's just 1-to-1, you're getting today, if we implemented this today, it would start small, maybe not $1,000 a month. It might only be 10 or 100. It would start small, but over time, as there's more and more automation in use, there are more hourly rates going out there and more of that sliver of the hourly rate funding the UBI. So over time, it would grow. So if it's 1-to-1 now, very small. When it's 10 times automation to one time human labor, then we've got tenfold on the UBI, and it would grow over time and do so directly proportionate to the use of automation. It would be evolutionary, not revolutionary, and it would also enable basically a smoother transition into these things.
Very interesting. So the next part here says every citizen has the right to one equal share of the automated labor force, an equal vote for what it does or does not do, and a fair share of what is produced as a whole. How is this not communism 2.0 or something? I mean, it's not like, I don't mean it, that sounds rude almost, but I kind of know what you mean. But we are headed in this direction, and I know what you're trying to.
Currency, really. Communism's a very different system.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, this is like, it's like within the realm of any of these labor side, any of these. And I get it, because this is where we're headed, and these are the challenges that we face, right? But yeah, well, I mean, because Karl Marx, everybody, all these economists always knew that automation was inevitable. Like everybody knew that automation was a coming down the track. So you're specifically, are you specifically worried about revolutions of labor, like worker revolutions? Is this what you're trying to buffer against?
Yeah, I mean, the internet is pregnant with the robot, and we might as well build the crib now, basically.
I'm not objecting. I'm not objecting to this idea, by the way. I think this is incredibly interesting, and I think it's something that we really have to think about as a policy mechanism. I'm just having an internal war with my free market side right now, with my Jonathan Jatke, where the market,
people from utilizing their own share of the automated labor force, you could use that on your own startup company. you could do that. It's very free market. You have access to the tools to be able to be competitive, whereas a simple UBI does not enable that. It would enable greater consolidation in the supply side of the economy, rather than being able to diversify that across the creation of lots of different new businesses through sharing the tools, not just having whatever, UBI payment that there is available.
The other concern I have is, we'll read this next part and then I'll lay out my concern, and it might not even be a valid concern, and you probably have an answer to this. So it says, does anyone have a better policy than this? If we made it a law, citizens would vote for what automated labor does or does not do, and the people can remain in control of what work gets done, what goals are accomplished, and where we go as a civilized society. Also, this enables a fair UBI payment funded by a profit-sharing system from automated labor being rented hourly instead of proprietarily owned, right? This UBI payment would start small today, but grow proportionally with the automation replacing people at jobs, getting larger over time, and softening the growing pains of this economic transition. Doing it this way will not overtax the citizens or businesses, and it enables access to hourly rate automation tools for a small business to be at a competitive against big business, distributing not just wealth to the demand side, but access to the means of automated production to the supply side, and therefore growing the middle class and economy overall. The only issue I take in that whole thing is, if citizens would vote on what automated labor does and does not do, how do you control that? Are you just talking about in a civilized? Are you just talking in a civil economy, shoes and pants and shirts and all this sort of stuff? Because it doesn't happen in the warfare economy. I mean, drones are flying around now. Barack Obama was bombing everyone out of the existence in the warfare, in military industrial complex. It doesn't seem like people get a vote in that side of things. And then, like on the civilian side, which I think you're talking about, what do you think the outcome is? That wouldn't industries vote to suppress? Wouldn't that harm the national economy when my industry would vote to suppress a piece of automation of another industry or another competitor because they don't want that? I don't get. Take me through it. Walk me through it.
It is a gray area, and it's something that would adjust over time as the state of technology and the state of automation changes, and just through different eras, it would be different. But basically, there would be a Department of Automated Labor, which is kind of like what the Department of Motor Vehicles is here in the States for cars. It says what's street legal and who can operate that. So similarly, with the Department of Automated Labor, it's what's street legal for a robot. Can you use those military drones for your own personal house security? Can they be armed with missiles and lasers or, a BB gun? I don't know. So being able to determine those things, we have a Department of Automated Labor, and they would be approving an automated labor system, saying this is okay in society. And based on those, we're able as voters to say, we want these things used in these ways or not in these ways, and we're able to help set labor rates. So the amount of automated labor that's available for specific industries might be lower, and they might have to pay more for it on that hourly rate. Whereas the things that we want done in society would have more people voting to use their automated labor towards doing those, and the labor rate would be lower. So those things get done easier.
In the world that we exist in now, are you for example, are you for a $15 minimum wage, minimum $1 an hour minimum wage, for example?
It depends on where you are in the country. The United States is big, and when you can buy a house for $30,000 in some areas, but you cannot buy just the land for $300,000 in other areas. What's an appropriate minimum wage? That type of thing. There's actually a billboard in San Francisco when they were looking at a $15 an hour minimum wage. which San Francisco does have a higher minimum wage than the state or federal regulations, because the city is very expensive to live in. And there was this billboard that was saying, "Oh, raise the minimum wage, automate those jobs." And that's going to happen.
That's the idea, right? I mean, look at all the McDonald's people who are now out of work. Now, let's go down to a real world example of these McDonald's staff. Okay, so you worked at McDonald's and you took orders all day, and then you got replaced by a machine. How would your system on that smaller scale and real life scale, how would your system be implemented from start to finish to impact those people?
So if you're looking at like an automated system that flips a burger at McDonald's, or that's a kiosk to do the order, or however it's accounted for, whatever that system is said to be, that would be given an hourly rate. So McDonald's would be renting that hourly rate, and a portion of that hourly rate would be going to the UBI to fairly fund the people that are displaced from that, as well as the general population. So if you lose your job,
it's a robot tax.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think the other thing, and I'm only playing with you here because hopefully I want you to get on MSNBC and talk to these people. I'm just going to play with you here because it's fun, and to give you some stimulus and stuff. But what about these financial guys? If you're pooling money anywhere, these financial hawks, they swing in and they start betting on it. They start making derivatives products. They start, someone says, well, why don't we put it in the stock market, because the stock market always goes up. And if it's a pool of money or insurance people want it, or, what do you do with that money if it starts to pool? Is it just automatically distributed, or would you pool it? Would you invest it?
So again, that's a bit of a gray area, as a policy like this might be translated through Congress and other things like that. How the end result might be, my picture is directly, as opposed to trying to manipulate financial markets or something like that. What we could do, the hourly rate that would be paid. So if McDonald's is paying, let's say, $100 an hour for the burger flipper kiosk system, right? And it's replaced the $15 an hour employees that they needed 10 of. So they went from 150 an hour to 100 an hour. It's cost effective, but 10 people lost their jobs. So out of that $100 an hours that McDonald's is paying for that automation system, let's say 10% of that would be going towards the UBI. Now you've got 24 hours a day of that thing running, not an 8-hour day and then 2 days off. So you're building basically $10 an hour funding the UBI 24 hours a day. It's not as much. It's not as much as a $15 an hour job, but it's not saying that those things are not elsewhere, or that you can't start your own business or any of those things. But as a beginning of this policy, you would have it would start small, and it would be in this one-off situation. You'd have $10 an hour essentially being split among those 10 employees, 24 hours a day. So as there's more and more automation that builds, they'd also be getting a piece of other forms of automation. So as we build new businesses, that amount would grow over time from more and more automation systems. So as people lose their jobs to automation systems, it's not a huge amount to begin with, but it would be something rather than nothing, and enables the ability to adjust that, similar to adjusting interest rates, to be able to tune the economy overall. So we get something that can be malleable. We can change it in the future to be able to fit whatever situation it would be, and it wouldn't be something that's based on who's voting for what politician that's making what promises. It would be something like the setting of interest rates to be able to do that. So I think the Federal Reserve Bank would be an appropriate place to administer that. And Yeah, so if people, if the minimum wage goes up and these people are replaced by an automation system, there's something that is funding at least a portion of their lives at that point. We're able to make like a social service through that UBI. And the way it's worded, when I originally wrote it, I said every citizen would have an equal share of what is produced as a whole, and I changed that to a fair share. So people that are well employed might not be in as much of a need, even though there's automation going on. They're well employed in comparison to people that are literally being displaced, that month. So rather than spreading it across the entire society, especially in the beginning, focusing on the people that are on the front line of that transition. And then again, over time, you end up having more and more automation systems, so that UBI amount grows more and more, and we're able to do more work than humans were able to do.
What about, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you could play around also with America Future Fund. So, if you pulled it, because I guess it would start small and grow over time. I mean, you could pool it, and then in event of a recession, you would let more out, or whatever. Because you also have minimum wage to play with as well. If you want to increase employment, you drop minimum wage as well, and also interest rates. If you want to stimulate investment, you drop interest rates.
Extremely unpopular to drop the minimum wage, so it pretty much never happens, and that's due to people saying we're not going to vote for you if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
Politics is determining the economic volatility there, as opposed to what's actually economically sound, even though it might not be a popular opinion.
But in a recession, usually people would rather a job over no job, regardless of that price, and then they start complaining about higher minimum wages because they say, hey, I'd really want a job. I'd do it for $9, but the law says 12 and the company can't hire me at 12. Screw that. I want a job. So sometimes, that's until people get desperate, and then all of a sudden politics might swing in the other direction. It's not often. It's not. You're right. You're 100% right. It's just in recessions, people do think differently because their incentives do change a little bit. So maybe there is, you said direct, maybe there is room there for a future fund. But I do like this sort of labor idea of manipulating the labor rate, at the Federal Reserve. It's interesting. Do you think it's compatible? I mean, in America, the reason that America is so, well, it's not just the population, but it's the fact that you have the Reserve note, the world reserve currency. And you're a great attractor for all the business around the world because everyone wants to extract. It's a mining process. Everybody comes to America to do business to get Benjamin, right? And that's why you have all the big businesses there. Now, do you think this could be replicated across different economies, or do you think America's in a unique position?
I think any capitalist, socialist, democratic nation would be able to do this. I think dictatorship might have difficulties depending on how their economies are structured. A communist country, which there aren't any major functioning communist countries, but I think that would have difficulty in doing that, and that they're not currency based. But yeah, I think this is something that could be adapted to a lot of different systems.
You see, somewhere this policy would be well received is actually in my country. This would be a really well received policy because people fear automation. They're also very socialist. They have a great welfare system, healthcare, all the other stuff. So they're already open. Their minds are well open to these ideas. And they do concentrate on labor a lot. There's a lot of labor regulations, labor laws, because they can afford it. The country is rich enough to be able to afford those sorts of concerns. So this policy, if preached here in this country, actually would gain a lot of traction. In America, you're right. I mean, people live and die in these corporate structures in America. You're born into a company and you die within that same company. That's becoming less and less common. That's definitely the story of the second half of the 20th century, but that's becoming less common now as people are starting to move more and more jobs over time. And it's becoming even, in the last 5 years or so, the rise of the gig economy, where people are literally have 10 jobs on the go, on the run, right? There's all jobs all over the place, but they're all small, low paying jobs. I do understand that notion, but yeah, in the old days, you worked for Hungry Jack's, you were born into Hungry Jack's, and you died Hungry Jack's, or not Burger King in America, right?
Well, basically, you're seeing a lot of retirement plans go away, that sort of thing. Also, there's a lot of not really sure what it's going to be like in 50 years, so we're not going to say, hey, work here for 50 years, or something like that, or 30 years. For your 30-year mortgage. Those types of career positions are falling away, although there's a lot that are based in like teaching and these types of things. Public institutions still have a lot of that through unions, but the feasibility of those things are there are breaking points. I mean, I'd be happy to talk to Australia in regards to
literally like because there's some like there's a popular show over here. It's on the national broadcaster. It's in a lot of trouble now for feminist stuff. But apart from that, I mean, they did have a futurist panel on a couple of weeks ago. And you would have fitted very well in on that futurist panel. But the guy, he was saying there's advancing automation, the lack of jobs, blah blah blah. And the lady said, "Oh my goodness, what are you going to do about the employment situation? What are you going to do for jobs?" And his only solution, the only thing he said was, "Well, in Japan, we could unautomate jobs that we already have here. So, for example, in Australia, we have beams, like a level crossing, how the beam goes up and down. We have these all over the place, in a construction site, right? The beam comes down, it's automatic. You don't drive your car through, you don't walk through, and then when it's safe to go, the beam comes up." And he said, this is all he said was, well, you could do what they do in Japan, and you could run a little man out there with a suit and tie on, and they put the beam down, and they hold the beam, and then when it's safe to go, they run off. I mean, that was his whole solution to advancing automation. Undo some of the automation that we already have. And that was it. Like, well done, you created like 30 jobs. I mean, like we're talking about millions of jobs disappearing. Like, are you going to unautomate, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, this is so ridiculous. And that's kind of like, it brings me back to this point you made here. If we made it law, citizens would vote for what automated labor does or does not do. And I'm telling you, in Australia, after that show, everyone would have put their hand up across the country and said, undo the automatic beams quickly. This is a national crisis. But what do you reckon?
Well, I think that overall, taking people from being tools and turning them into being friends and content people is the evolution that we're going for.
Yeah.
And while you might have an influencer that changes automatic, beam gates to instead be controlled by a person who has to sit there all day and therefore collect some money every time someone goes through in order to get their paycheck or in some way. We look at how those things might pan out. I think having the freedom of a society to determine those things so that it's not a for-profit entity determining those things based on who has the strongest lawyers or what have you, who can throw more money at something, and having a giant lawyer fist fight over stuff, determining things as opposed to a vote from the people. I think we're going to be more evolutionary in advancing society if we're able to vote for those things on our own, and not just be dictated by a for-profit motive,
But
most
this
likely.
is the other idea. Like lawyers are being automated away, accountants are being automated
Yeah.
away, financial advisors are being automated away, reporters, financial reporting is basically automated away now. And this is the thing: is this just giving people the power to vote their old jobs back in?
Well, they wouldn't be the only ones voting. So it's like if you were voting for, I want my job to not be automated, that doesn't mean that the number of people at that job are the majority. So, it might not happen.
How does this go for mental? How does this go for mental health? If you're somebody who really didn't want their job automated away, and you wouldn't vote for your job to be automated away, let's just take your job as a school teacher, for example, and then suddenly society said, "Nah, screw that guy. There's more problems over here. Let's automate that guy's job away." And what happens to your mental health if it's not?
Or basically, let's vote that I would put my form of, or my unit of automated labor would be accessible as that labor pool, is basically how that vote would happen. So then it's still up to the person who's paying the paycheck to pay the hourly rate on the automated labor or pay the hourly rate on the human being. There's nothing that's forcing anything happening. It's still a free market. But whether or not that hourly rate is big or small has to do with how much labor is in that labor pool. So if you don't want your job automated away and you vote for it to not be there, that shrinks that labor pool a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. So if 90% of the people still say, yeah, I want my labor to be able to do that, then you could have a bigger labor pool and a smaller hourly rate, essentially on getting it done. It's not the people directly regulating what people can and cannot do. There's still be a place for regulators in that, such as like you can't have an algorithm determining weapons of mass destruction going on or something. You can't have a robot necessarily doing some human jobs or things that need human fail safes. But you could have other things that could be done, and it's not necessarily regulated by that vote. It's just that the labor resource, be it automated or human, would still be a vote that comes from the people.
So I guess the other question I have is, what does the future look like because you're worried about big corporates and you're worried about not enough competition and with smaller competitors and stuff like that. But what does the future actually look like? Because it's quite disturbing if you really play this out. You've got solutions here, obviously, and you're offering up your solutions. But what does the future of labor actually look like then? If on the current path that we're on, and then on the path that you're talking about, I don't get. This is crazy.
So the future of labor for human beings would be whatever you can get hired to do, what you're competitive at, right? So if an employer says, I'd like to hire a human instead of an automation system, maybe they're the same price basically, or maybe it's the automation system is too expensive because this guy will do it for less money, or what have you. You're still able to have those things, as well as probably a minimum wage and all that involved as well. But humans being competitive against automation and still having a say at what that labor pool is going to be for automation, because robots can't vote for themselves, and they also can't pay income taxes for themselves. So it's not like the robot's going to say, oh, that's immoral, I'm not going to go do that. I don't care how much you pay me. It can't do that. But human beings can have a say in that, not just as regulators that are individuals in governments that are sometimes corruptible, but as a society setting labor rates based on what you would put your share of the automated workforce into doing. You also have your share of yourself to be able to what jobs are you can get. So I mean, essentially, we are increasingly building more automation systems, and human beings are competing with that. So if you have a truck driver and a self-driving truck in competition, it's not saying that the human truck driver can't, put a bid and transport some shipping container. They're just in competition to the self-driving truck that does not have to sleep when it's going across the country, that pays less in insurance because it's a better driver, that can pick up at any hour or what have you. So as we look at the competition happening, the guy that's the truck driver is going to have to lower his rate to be competitive, right? Most likely. So as we're looking at those types of things occurring, it's not to say that there's no place for human beings, but as we're transitioning out of human labor due to what's cost effective, what's going to be the survival of the fittest in the financials, we would still get a UBI that would come from the automation. So as people are less competitive against automation, they're compensated with a UBI from that automated labor. And that hourly rate, a portion of it's going for the UBI, and another portion is going to the person that makes the automated labor system. So like the robot manufacturer is still getting paid for inventing a robot and building it. They could privately market these things. Like if Ford Motor Company comes out with, like, they have a biped robot, and it's going to, take the package off of the UPS truck and drop it off to the people, they can advertise that. And it's in competition to humans. But if it's in use, a portion of it, or a portion of its hourly rate, is going to compensate the people who are no longer as competitive against them.
Yeah, so now, in a way, the people can lower their hourly rate, be hired to compete against the machine, and still actually make the same amount of money, sort of, as well.
Kind of, yeah. So it's not stopping people from working. It's also not stopping people from starting their own businesses or having just, human-based businesses, kind of like, locally grown foods or something. I'm sure that sort of thing would occur. Like, I want organic foods instead of something that's, a GMO processed thing or whatever, is some of the public perception. We might have a similar thing with, I want human labor rather than automated labor. And that might be something you could print on a product or something, like made in the USA by humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah,
you're
really highlighting the whole human. It's an interesting world where, when you actually start to consider it, because if when humans start going out of business, when they start getting uncompetitive, you're talking about bolstering human competitiveness against the robots in a fair way, right? In a fair, distributed way, which is economically sound and politically stable.
Yeah. So in the beginning, when there's not as much of that UBI coming in, it would be funneled more towards the people who are directly losing their jobs to automated systems. So in the US, there's about 3.25 million driving jobs, and it's one of the most popular jobs globally. But here in the US, it's about 1% of the population gets paid to drive. So with self-driving cars, which here in California have been legal since 2006, they've just been, it's $250,000, so no one wants to buy it, but they're now like 50,000. So maybe
the price points dropping, and the technology is getting better, so the adoption rate's set to increase. And then as those people get more money, as those companies get more money, they can acquire more, which drops it even further, which makes it price competitive, which eventually starts competing with the people who are driving, and probably will most likely push people out of a job in that field if that continues.
Yeah, so
you should start now. That's your argument, is they should be starting the process of Mallory 2020 economics now, today, while that price point's still high.
Yeah, so I mean, it smooths the transition instead of waiting for for masses of impoverished people to revolt. That's not what we're trying to do. That's not a good idea, and not an intelligent process. That's like having a baby without a crib. Let's plan ahead. And so while Andrew Yang has a great policy with $1,000 a month, a lot of people think that's very expensive as far as the taxation. It's increasing federal tax revenue by 50 to 75% to fund that, really. So that's a huge growth in taxes, but it's going to make a huge change in society, and maybe an ideological one as well. With what I've got, it would start small and grow over time, proportionate with automation. And the people who are displaced first would have essentially like a social service. We'd be able to funnel things there first to be able to help that transition occur. And over time, as more and more automation is occurring, and the amount of UBI taxation that's coming in through that hourly rate and a portion of it, we'd be able to spread out to eventually get to all citizens for having a vote and for having an income from automation. But to be able to transition it smoothly and have an evolution rather than a revolution, I think is the way to go.
Benzo in 2020, I'm gonna have to talk to him about this. It's something up his alley, definitely. Because he's off in La La Land with his $52,000 UBI. I don't agree with that. I think 1,000 is a good talking point. I think it's more realistic than 52,000. But he smacks on top of that his federal land dividend idea in the Futurist New Deal. But yes, I like this idea. I have some issues with it. I'm playing with it in my head, but I like the concept, and I like a lot of the ideas that are coming out of this. I really do. I'm not objecting to it at all. I think you've really thought through automation properly. You've taken into the political consequences of automation, boredom, and a whole bunch of other factors. I think there's issues with manipulation, I guess, maybe, that can come down for this. For example, it's all a bracket, right? So if some big company just says, well, it is not an automated system, I'm not paying on that one, I'm going to move it over into a new category, they're going to get out of it, right? And that's what they do all the time in the backroom deals of they're going to say, oh, well, that's actually part of my infrastructure, under my infrastructure balance, on my balance sheet. That's not automation, so then they get out of paying their fair share, and that's what always happens with corruption. And
so if we have a Department of Automated Labor that's essentially like the DMV approving cars to be able to...
You got to run the Department of Automated Labor. You got to run it. If you're not running it, it's not going to work.
Exactly. It's a gray area, and there is a corruptibility in it.
Yeah, and these big corps, these big backroom deals, Washington deals, all this sort of stuff, and that's a normal thing in dirty politics and all that sort of stuff, and that's not a criticism of your theory either. That's totally normal across all systems of politics and economics and sociability and stuff like that. All I'm saying is it's something that you might want to expand into a little bit in your theory. Talk about how you would address that concern, of shifting from the automation pile, because what if the McDonald's people said the kiosk is just infrastructure? That's just a part of the sewage system. You know what I mean? It's not automating away the labor of a kiosk worker. Then they don't have to pay it. They just pay a normal tax, on So this is an area. It's something for you to think about. But hopefully that'll make your argument stronger. Because I do like it. I'm not totally opposed. I think I'm worried. What Tucker Carlson, right? Tucker Carlson was asked about. He said, what do you think about this truck thing? What do you think about the truck thing? With all these people going to lose their jobs, automated truck. And Tucker Carlson said, can't happen. Outlaw the truck thing, or take it take it down to an amount, a manageable amount, where we automate this region and give these people jobs, and then automate this region and give this people jobs, and let's do it over 50 years. Because if we automate the jobs with all those young men out of a job straight away, we will have a revolt. Tucker Carlson is opposed to truck automation on the whole because he's worried about revolution. You're saying this as well, Mallory 2020. This is not a stupid idea, not at all. I just think there's a little room to work, but the talking point, the ideas, great.
Yeah, and I do worry about that as well, but I don't want to see us become Luddites. We're not going to go, throw our phones in the garbage and ask for directions off of a human instead of using GPS. Why would we not want to be an advanced nation? You know what I mean? I don't think public opinion is going to do that. So, and nor is what, survival of the financial fittest and the free market. So whether we want to or not, and whether Tucker Carlson is a proponent of major government regulation that strangles business from being able to be globally competitive or competitive here in the United States, that is a little bit uncharacteristic of the guy. But it's, those are the kinds of what do you do reactions when faced with a really difficult problem. And I think that's why it's been somewhat of a mute subject until Andrew Yang.
Yeah, beautifully put. All right, that's Jason. That's Mallory2020.com. Go and check it out. It's a really interesting idea. Interesting. Humans are becoming obsolete more and more so by the day. And how do we deal with that problem on a political and sociological level that's fair for the economy? And I think this is a step in the right direction. I think that we have to think about these ideas. We have to think about these sorts of taxes, UBI taxes, or parallel systems, these parallel economic systems. You're inventing a whole new system, a system of built on the value of labor, and it's interesting. Social revolution.
You're
not a fan of it,
right? As far as the major gray area of the system being what constitutes a unit of automated labor when looking at an automation system, and that is something that would be the equivalent to local politics when looking at how industries can develop. It's also the ability to subsidize industries and things like that to be able to develop, more of this and less of that if we need to as a nation. But it does provide a window for corruption, and you're absolutely correct in that. So it is something that we would need to have, an auditor fail-safes in regards to being able to determine what is reality when it comes to defining an automation system.
Yeah, it's like this sort of it's like an evolving constitution that's sort of fixed. It's kind of weird. It'd have to have a fixed constitutional base with very defined definitions, and then have also an ability to grow as the technology advances. It's kind of a list, almost a dot point. It'd be like a definition and then a bunch of dot points underneath to allow for expansion. It's because because technology is going to change.
They can produce whatever type of matter in front of you out of these protons, neutrons, and electrons. That's a completely different thing than counting how many robots are carrying packages.
Exactly.
So as we, may end up in a singularity system like that, that's definitely, something that we would need to adapt this type of policy that I think works in current day.
I got one more question before we run. One more question. Multinationals, okay? So internationally, is this America First policy where, I asked you before about the transferability between national concepts, but what about if it's an American company and I'm doing business in China?
Meaning,
do I pay the tax? Should I pay the tax if it's automated over there, or to China, or whatever? Is there anything like that? Should they still be paying tax back to America, or is it tariff? What about a tariff UBI tax or something?
So if there's an example where, say, Ford Motor Company makes this biped, walking, talking robot, and China wants to use this robot to do some form of labor, they're going to compensate Ford for purchasing or renting that robot, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I guess that would be, something like a tariff deal, potentially, in regards to being able to export labor in such a way. It could be a whole nother, can of worms based on how another country's doing something. But I'm pretty sure Ford wouldn't just say, yeah, here, take them. You don't need to give us any compensation.
Yeah. Yeah, international agreements on this deal would be really interesting. Domestically, I can see it quite functioning quite interesting, quite well. But then international sort of taxation or advantages would be interesting. That's Mallory 2020, everybody. Please check him out. Please check out the website and have a read and have a think about automation. He's there from Silicon Valley, the heart of tech world. Where everything's happening right there at the heart of tech world. So thank you very much, Jason, for coming and telling us about your interesting ideas.
Thank you. Maybe I'll get to come to Australia one day and see how it works there.
Yeah, they'd love it here. Trust me. What is it called? This idea? Have you got is it the Mallory 2020 plan or what?
It's just. Right now, it's Mallory2020.com. But
you should give it a cool sounding name, like the Mallory automation thesis or something.
I'll come up with something. It originally came out of a science fiction book that I wrote published in 2012 called Proxy: When Robots Work Better, meaning robots are the proxy workforce, kind of like how a lawyer is a proxy for a person in the legal world.
I want to read that. Give me that book.
It's a very
I want to read it.
Book. I wrote the movie. You can read it in a few hours. And if you'd like, go to proxybyjasonmallory.com. Send me a message and I'll send you a copy.
Beautiful. Thank you. And everybody check that out. Cool. That sounds really good. All right. Thank you very much. Mallory 2020. Check him out. That's Detonation, where we're putting death out of business. Thank you, everybody.